Hello, Alan.
Hello, Lilu. It's wonderful to see you.
Same for me as always. And I'm excited about your latest book, The Princess Frogs and Ugly Sisters. How cool is that? I loved it. I just want to remind everybody you're actually a professor of literature, so this is going to be quite serious.
Oh, well, there will be a few jokes in there as well.
I know.
Let's play it.
No, yeah, definitely. And but this is your latest book, and it's really the healing power of the Grimm's Brothers Tale.
Exactly, exactly.
So I wanted to hear, because this is really interesting. Tell us a little bit about those Grimm brothers and who they were and how did this got started.
Okay, well, I'm glad you asked that question because most people assume when they hear about the Grimm brothers that these were just two old guys who wandered around Germany collecting these tales. But in fact, they were both very learned men. Uh, Together, they worked for many years producing Germany's first dictionary, which is a very carefully researched piece of work. One of them was a minister in Berlin. I mean, he was a minister in Berlin, and the other was quite a devoted collector of these tales, and he made absolutely sure that he got the very best versions of the very best tales. And we tend to forget that there is real value in what these tales have to say. But in 1812, when the Grimm brothers first published these were not for kids. People were reading this saying, wow, this is great. You know, this adults should learn from this.
Mm.
Before they had the word psychology, they had Grimm's tales. And that's why the brothers set about collecting them and printing them and making sure the correct versions got out.
So that's what that was the intent actually, for people to have insights and learn and kind of be like a development tool, I guess, a personal development tool.
Absolutely. You see, before we had psychology and therapists, we had folk tales. And if you imagine you were a peasant in Germany or France or the United States, you probably had two sources of wisdom. One of them was the Bible. Most people in Europe certainly were Christian, although it might have been the Torah. And the other was whatever folk wisdom, whatever folk legends came through your people. And that was really the germ of the important wisdom, because the Bible can tell you how to get into heaven, but it can't tell you about what to do if you're in love with the wrong person. It doesn't really talk about that. It doesn't tell you how to deal with someone who is narcissistic, someone who is destructive, a mother who wants to hurt her child. The Bible doesn't go to that space. So we can almost say, here is the Grimm brothers, and here is the Bible. And, you know, as W.H. Auden said, and Auden was a great, great poet, he said, everybody should know their Grimm brothers as well as the Bible.
Wow, that's a big
Yeah,
statement.
it's a really big statement. And, you know, he's not a shallow writer, W.H. Auden. He's one of the big ones. And he said it at a time when it was probably unfashionable to say nice things about Germans, because he said
Uh,
that during the Second World War.
but you're explaining that they're kind of classified in different categories
Yes,
depending on what. Can you tell us about that?
yes. Well, I think the Grimm brothers wanted to include local favourites and tales that everybody knew, and some of them are kind of insulting. I mean, there's one about the Swabian soldiers, you know, and presumably Swabians were the people you made fun of in those days. And there's one that criticises the Bavarians, you know, and so these are politically not very kind. There are some even which have unkind things to say about Jews, because this was an anti-Semitic time. But those are very much in the minority. There are 200 tales, and the finest ones, actually there are 210 tales, and the finest ones will tell us really profound truths about ourselves, about psychology, and about how to co-create your future, how to work from the heart, always from the heart, not from the intellect, in order to move yourself into the best possible space to be a fully actualized human being.
So I would like to go with you a little bit in more details on the actual stories, and because you selected some of them, but I want to hear first how did you select these? Why did you select these? You know, and then later we can go into why they were transformed and to the actual story itself, maybe.
Yeah, I selected a number of stories which it seemed to me were particularly rich, and I also wanted to make sure that if I gave the reader a few good ones, it would show that there is more to be found. But also the complexity of the stories. Yes, there it is. The complexity of the stories gets more intriguing as we go through the collection. So, I selected them because some of them are the ones we know, like Cinderella, had to have the frog king, as it's rightly called, the frog prince. And of course, as you mentioned, we tend to remember the wrong versions. We tend to remember what Disney produced rather than what the Grimm brothers wrote. And Disney's fine, you know.
Yeah. But there was 210 of them, so you're saying also in the book that there's some of them that we just probably have just overread or just didn't pay attention, but where there's true wisdom in.
That's right. And actually, because in our age, we've tended to say, oh, fairy stories, they're for kids.
Right.
We've tended to choose the ones that we think are easy for kids to take on. And, you know, the Grimm brothers deal with incest, with attempted rape, if not actual rape,
wow.
and some really difficult things, narcissism. These are things that perhaps in our day we're afraid to talk to our children about. The Grimm brothers collected these tales, and they knew these were containing important truths that we had to look at.
Mm-hmm. But it was also a mess, huh? Apparently, there's kind of a bit of everything. It was quite hard for you, not hard for you, but you had to sort it out also and bring it in some kind of logic in.
That's right. Not all the stories are the best, but think of it like a comedian on stage. A comedian on stage knows that he'll start on a high note, maybe, and then there'll be a couple of less good jokes, and he'll throw in a good one, and so there was a sense, I think, from the Grimms that they had set it up so that there were star turns every so often. And they were very careful to do that.
So tell us about the one that why some of them were transformed. What happened there?
Okay, well, the most obvious one that's transformed that everybody gets wrong is the one I start with, the Frog King. Okay, and everybody, I talk to people, I talked to you once before. Whenever I mention the Frog King, they go, oh, the Frog Prince. And then the next thing they say is you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you meet your prince.
Yeah.
And I've met people who've run their lives that way. They've assumed, okay, I've got to have a lot of really bad relationships before I get a good one. Okay? The trouble is, if you go to the story, the princess does not kiss the frog to transform him. She does something else. She tries to kill the frog.
She's sick of it.
She's sick of it. Here's this horrible frog, and it's in her bed, and it's saying, oh, I want to cozy up to you. And she says, ah! And when she does that, she shows that she knows she's got to be in bed with someone one day, but it's not going to be this filthy frog. And that's the moment when she shows self-esteem. That's when she becomes worth loving. And that's really important. Now, you can imagine the people at Disney saying, oh, if we show this little girl throwing the frog against the wall, we'll have thousands of kids all over the world trying to kill frogs. Or something like that.
Not too good.
But, there's nothing, this silly kiss thing, no. If the princess had simply agreed to kiss the frog, she would simply be weak-willed, stupid, and easily manipulated. And the whole point about the tale is that she rebels into her sense of her own power and says, I'm not putting up with any rubbish. Now think of that for a second. Out there in the world, our world, and in my counselling practice, I meet lots of people every day who don't ask for enough from their significant other. They don't ask the frog to grow up and become a person. They don't say, hey, if this relationship is going to work, you've got to develop. And that's the saddest thing I can think of. Everywhere, perfectly wonderful human beings do not develop because nobody's asked them to. Nobody has said, what's the best version of who you are? And that's a lesson that's still around today, and that's why, you know, the Grimm brothers keyed into it straight away. They said, this is a powerful story, and we have to be aware of it.
But a lot of people say also that we don't change, you know, that it's people just don't change, people remain the same.
Well, people will remain the same until they are given valid reasons to change. Everybody tends to settle into a rut, but we can all change. We're all capable of it.
Tell me about the one, the story of the youth who went forced to learn what fear was. That's a pretty cool one about love, isn't it? Or courage.
Yeah, it's a very, very long tale, but I'll give you the center part of it, and that is this young man is very brave because he's stupid. He doesn't allow fear to come into his world. So, you know, when he's sent into the graveyard, everyone thinks, oh, you know, he'll be afraid, and he isn't. He turns up at a castle which is supposed to be haunted, and is told if he spends 3 nights there, he will win the king's daughter to marry. And because he's so, I suppose you'd say, unsuspecting, when the ghosts appear, he just treats them like the neighborhood toughs out on a drinking spell. So the ghosts appear, and he says, you know, don't make so much noise, and throws them out of the room. And another set of ghosts appear, and they're playing skittles with dead men's bones, rolling skulls across the floor. This young man has no sense that this is in any way ghoulish. He says, wait a second, you know, let's make these skulls really round so we can roll them properly. He says, yes, now we'll have fun. And he does. So, you know, right away we've got a figure here who is brave because he's dumb. He's brave because he just has no imagination. Now what happens is he wins the princess as his wife, and one night he's in bed, and the princess is really fed up with him, because he keeps saying, oh, I wish I could feel what fear was. I wish I could feel what fear was. And the princess is just really fed up with this dolt of a husband. So in the middle of the night, when he's asleep, she takes a bucket full of cold water and little fishes and pours them over him in bed. And he wakes up, and he goes, oh, now I'm shuddering, now I'm shuddering. And you think, oh, what a peculiar thing to do. And then you realize, beforehand he was prepared for ghastly things to happen. But when he's in bed, asleep, he's not prepared. And so it's that shock that happens. And that's the shock that we all need in order to bring ourselves down to earth, as it were, to value the people who are most precious to us in our lives. In the book, what I say is, it's exactly like if you wake up in the middle of the night and the fire alarms are going and you smell smoke. You know, you don't go, I wonder if I should run out of the house with my collection of china. You grab the people who are closest to you and you run out the door. You know, you grab your friends, your lover, your wife, your children, your cat. But you might think about your wallet until you're outside. And that's what happens to this young man. This young man is given the wonderful opportunity to be surprised into being vulnerable. And you know, we can't feel love unless we've felt vulnerable. Because when you say to somebody, I love you, you are making yourself totally open and vulnerable to that person, if it's real love. If it's not real love, then you deserve what you get, it seems to me. But what a wonderful tale that says it's not courage that matters, it's not victory that matters, it's being open and vulnerable enough so you can relate fully to another person. You know, again, in my counseling practice, I'm surrounded by people who won't let themselves open up, and they won't let themselves be vulnerable. They'll say, I'm going to wait until he says he loves me first before I say that I love. And I take a risk. Take a risk. Find your courage, your real courage. And so I think the story of the youth who went forward to learn what fear was, I think it is a profound, profound tale for our times. And I tell my clients about it, and many of them sort of smile with relief and say, yes, there is another way forward.
Do you counsel actually mainly couples, or?
I have counselled couples. I don't have any at the moment, but I counsel individuals mostly.
That are stuck in their life, or that feel challenged?
That's what happens. I mean, those are the people who come for counselling. If your life is going splendidly, you don't come for counselling.
Exactly.
If your life is stuck, or you can't make a transition from one place to another, that's when
you need a new insight.
You need a new insight, and the Grimm's Tales are very good at providing those.
Cool. So what's your favorite?
Oh, I think one of my favorites is one that nobody ever reads, which is called The Skillful Huntsman.
Oh.
And I talk about that in the book. And what's really exciting about that story is that this skillful huntsman is presented with some real temptations. He's presented with the temptation of a life of crime. And when he goes to abduct the princess, who's going to be presumably ransomed, possibly raped, I don't know. I mean, it's a very grim tale. There are 3 giants who are egging him on. He sees her and he says, I don't want this life of crime. And he changes his mind, and then he leaves the castle without telling anybody that he's just killed the 3 giants. And I think to myself, what a wonderful story. He realizes he's met someone important, the princess, who's asleep, and she's had an effect on him. She has somehow called forward his higher moral values. And although he does a moral deed, he doesn't stand around saying, no, I want my reward. He leaves, which is exactly true to life. Sometimes when we go through transitions, we kind of startle ourselves. We do something moral and upright and wonderful, and we go, I suppose that's just what needed to be done. And it's not until later that we think, maybe that was, rather extraordinary. But because he's done this, he gives the princess a chance to develop as well. He gives her the chance to get free of her father. In the story, her father, the king, says, well, who killed these giants? And the ugly old one-eyed captain of the guards, a liar, says, I killed them. He says, great, well, now you can marry my daughter. And she says, no, I am having nothing to do with it. So the king attempts to humiliate her. He says, you've got to go out and earn your living. And so she sets up a shop with clay pots, and he arranges to have all the clay pots broken. So she's reduced, and eventually she's reduced to being a cook for free for everybody who's out there who begs for a meal. I mean, that's humiliating for a princess. Because cooking can be, especially over open fires, that's a hot, difficult, and she's got to create these free meals. But she doesn't hesitate. She realizes that this is something that is worthy, giving food to the poor. But she also knows that, just like in the Frog Prince, where the princess doesn't want the frog, she knows that she's not going to sell herself short for an easy life married to that ugly, wicked old captain. And because of this, because she has demonstrated her guts, she's able to grow in stature. And gradually word gets round that, hey, there's this wonderful woman who gives free food. And the skillful huntsman has been off trying to earn a living, and he says, wow, I could really use someone like that in my life because I need a square meal. And strangely enough, it brings them together again. And it's one of those things that I sometimes remind people of, when they feel that they're trying their best, they're working away, and the world is against them. I say, you don't know what you are doing is going to create. It's going to create a situation that is going to bring you what you need. But you must be patient and wait for what you need to appear. And sooner or later, the skillful huntsman turns up and he says, he's actually carrying various things that he had taken from the castle. And the princess says, "Hey, I know that stuff. Who are you?" He says, "Well, I killed these giants." And she says, "Well, that's extraordinary. Because then he must be the..." So the story ends happily. But if we look at that meeting, it's not one man swaggers in and says, "Hey, I'm the guy for you." It's two people who allow themselves to discover each other, not knowing who the other is. The princess doesn't know that the huntsman is a hero of the highest order, and the huntsman doesn't know that this woman serving him the food is a princess. They look at each other and they say, "Wait a second, we're linked somehow. We're linked in ways that we don't yet know." And what, of course, they discover is that destiny has been moving them towards each other all along. So it's a very interesting story. It could have ended right away when the huntsman kills the three giants, but that wouldn't have allowed either of them to grow in stature and patience and wisdom. And so that's why, to me, it's a magical tale. It reaches a lot further than many tales we have, which only give the growth from one part of view.
Brilliant. I just love listening to you. It's like it brings the kid out of me again. You're a fantastic storyteller too. No, but this is a great feeling, I think to bring us back to our childlike, it's fantastic. I think this is part of what life is about too.
Oh, absolutely. Because, when we go into that place of, as you say, childlike wonder, what we do is we free our imaginations. And suddenly these are not just stories, but they're actually mythic tales that can reach deep into our unconscious selves and transform us if we let them. But if we don't read them, and if we don't read the right version.
Yeah. But what surprised me is that, like, the Maya calendar that was created so long ago, and all this is still so valid and still applicable in our daily life, and they were written thousands of years ago for the Maya calendar, and it's pretty cool.
Well, the fact that wisdom has been around for a while doesn't mean it's out of date. It just means that people have misunderstood it, or haven't paid correct attention to it.
Yeah, that makes us wonder how many things have been distorted in life.
Yes, exactly.
Well, this is fantastic. Tell us the last one. Just the last one, please.
Okay.
The Cinderella story.
1912, when the Grimm Brothers first published these were not for kids. People were reading this saying, "Wow, this is great. This adults should learn from this." Before they had the word psychology, they had Grimm's Tales. And that's why the brothers set about collecting them and printing them and making sure the correct versions got out.
So that was the intent, actually, for people to have insights and learn and kind of be like a development tool, I guess, a personal development tool.
Absolutely. You see, before we had psychology and therapists, we had folk tales. And if you imagine you were a peasant in Germany or France or the United States, you probably had two sources of wisdom. One of them was the Bible. Most people in Europe certainly were Christian, although it might have been the Torah. And the other was whatever folk wisdom, whatever folk legends came through your people. And that was really the germ of the important wisdom, because the Bible can tell you how to get into heaven, but it can't tell you about what to do if you are in love with the wrong person. It doesn't really talk about that. It doesn't tell you how to deal with someone who is narcissistic, someone who is destructive, a mother who wants to hurt her child. The Bible doesn't go to that space. So we can almost say, here is the Grimm brothers and here is the Bible. And, you know, okay, well, I'm glad you asked that question because most people assume when they hear about the Grimm brothers that these were just two old guys who wandered around Germany collecting these tales. But in fact, they were both very learned men. Together, they worked for many years producing Germany's first dictionary, which is a very carefully researched piece of work. One of them was a minister in Berlin. I mean, he was a minister in Berlin. And the other was quite a devoted collector of these tales. And he made absolutely sure that he got the very best versions of the very best tales. And we tend to forget that there is real value in what these tales have to say. But in 18, as W.H. Auden said, and Auden was a great, great poet, he said, everybody should know their Grimm brothers as well as the Bible.
Wow, that's a big statement.
It's a really big statement. And, you know, he's not a shallow writer, W.H. Auden. He's one of the big ones. And he said it at a time when it was probably unfashionable to say nice things about Germans, because he said that during the Second World War.
So, but you're explaining that they're kind of classified in different categories, depending on what. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, well, I think the Grimm brothers wanted to include local favorites and tales that everybody knew.
Hello, Allan.
Hello, Lilu. It's wonderful to see you.
Same for me as always. And I'm excited about your latest book, The Princes, Frogs, and Ugly Sisters. How cool is that? I loved it. I just want to remind everybody, you're actually a professor of literature, so this is going to be quite serious.
Oh, well, there will be a few jokes in there as well.
I know.
Let's do it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And but this is your latest book, and it's really the healing power of the Grimm Brothers Tale.
Exactly.
So I wanted to hear, because this is really interesting, tell us a little bit about those Grimm brothers and who they were and how did this got started.